I will get us started. So I'm going to be presenting work that I did on policing during the COVID-19 pandemic, and specifically in the very initial year when things shut down in March of 2020, if we can all remember that time. So what we know of policing more generally is that police arrests are a very common event in the sort of life course of youth. And often when we think about the criminal legal system, we are often talking about adults, but most people interact with the criminal justice system when they're a youth. And we often sort of forget that police are stopping kids and interrupting sort of their daily modes of activity pretty often. And so our first encounter with police is often happening when we're children or teens. And this exposure to the criminal justice system through policing has been shown very widely to harm people's children and youth's mental health. And of course, there's the increased risk of being exposed to fatal police violence. A demographic study published in PNAS showed that 1 in every 1,000 young Black men should expect to die from police violence in their lifetime. So there's a very serious sort of concern about the hyper-policing of youth. However, most of policing in youth is focused on the sort of within school sort of experience. We focused a lot on this so-called school to prison pipeline, and specifically how exposure to suspension and expulsion, and also school-based officers, placing police officers in school has increased children's and youth's exposure to policing. And as a sociologist who studies neighborhoods and communities, I actually want to sort of just step one sort of area outside of the school grounds and think about how policing is interacting with the spatial location of schools. And criminologists think a lot about hotspots. Where's the highest level of activity? How can we concentrate our policing in that activity? But less so have thought about how schools are used as a hotspot for police activity. So we sort of wanted to just describe what happened to policing during the COVID-19 pandemic when schools shut down, and what specifically happened to the exposure of policing to youth during this time period. So this graph is plotting the rate of arrests for people under 18 years old. The dark line is the rate of arrest for youth in 2020, and the grayed out line is the rate of arrest in 2019. We estimate that after remote learning was implemented, youth arrest rates fell by 54% on average across 4 US cities. We studied this in New York City, Charleston, Pittsburgh, and Boston. So really wide array of cities in terms of sort of overall rates of policing and region. What's interesting about this graph, and I'd love to talk about this during the TAP part of the event, is if you look at 2019, there's a significant dip in the rate of arrest during the summer months, which is sort of contrary to most criminological research, which suggests that arrests would rise in warmer months. And it suggests that school closures, not just school closures related to the pandemic, but also during summer recess, might actually reduce children's exposure to policing. In other words, rates of arrest in the summer of 2019 mirrored the rates during the pandemic when schools were completely closed. Okay, so there's this huge decline in arrests that happened, but it really happened among Black and Latinx children. Now, this is to say that the absolute change for Black and Latinx children means that there's this enormous over-policing going on among youth of color. And even though the majority of this decline happened among Black and Latinx children, the rate of arrest for Black children is still 4 times the rate of white children in the pre-pandemic period, and it's 8 times in the post-pandemic period. So enormous racial disparities persist. So what I sort of so how I sort of summarize this is that schools are embedded within a larger spatial structure of policing. And it's not just what's happening in schools, it's happening right around schools when kids are going to school and coming home from school. And the pandemic kind of de-emphasized the school as a location for policing, which had a sort of population level effect on the exposure to policing during this time period, specifically among minority youth. And it's really important, I think, the takeaway methodologically to measure our baseline levels. So what we found was that for Black children, even in the context of a pandemic, their rate of arrest is still 4 times that of white children outside of a pandemic. And so what does that tell us about sort of the racial structure of policing, especially in early life? So that is my time. Next, we'll have Dr. Jonathan Jay. Thank you.